everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of thecinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today, y'all, we are about to get haunted. It's getting spooky up in here because we are celebrating Halloween, which if you're tuning in when this drops is tomorrow. We're going to be talking about some of this season's best horror films. A few of the movies we're going to talk about in depth are The Substance, Speak No Evil, the remake, It's What's Inside, and Smile 2. And while I have not seen it, do not worry, gorehounds. We are going to tip our hats to Terrifier 3. Laurent has taken it upon himself to see the movie so that he could provide an opinion on it in this podcast. Now, before we get to all of the good spooky treats we have in store in terms of horror movies, I am so thrilled to interview a friend of the show, Oklahoma City Council person, OCU English and Modern Languages Artist in Residence, film professor, member of the OFCC, James Cooper. Very excited to welcome James because he's going to be talking about his first book release, Moonlit Massacre. So James, thanks so much for joining us, sir.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So much to talk about with Moonlit Massacre. I think it's a great interest to horror fans tuning in today. But before we get there, I have to welcome my co-host in crime. He's an award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker, and I hear rumor he just was voted in as a member of the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle, Laurent Chapman. Laurent, welcome.
I am so excited to talk about all the projects that we're about to discuss. I think Oscar season is my favorite season, but the only thing that tips that, is spooky season, and so we're converging those worlds right now, and so I'm very excited to talk about everything.
It's really the most wonderful time of the year, frankly.
Fall time's great.
Yeah, it's the best.
Also, the temperature's nice,
I would typically agree with you, but in Oklahoma, it was in the 80s today.
That's fair.
So,
fair.
But oh my God, the first half of October was murderous.
Yes. Yeah, agreed.
The breeze is nice. Let me rephrase.
We're almost there. We might get to fall weather in November, maybe.
Right.
Finally. Well, listeners, hey, if you enjoyed today's conversation or any of our previous conversations, please help us out by leaving our show a rating and review on your preferred podcast app of choice, most notably Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That'll help us get discovered by more horror hounds just like you. Let's kick things off by talking with our friend James Cooper about his first book release, Moonlit Massacre. It is a book from publisher Literati Press. It was on store shelves. I say now on store shelves if you get to the store and they happen to have a copy because it's not sold out already somehow. I hear the first printing has already completely sold out. But on store shelves, digital and physical store shelves in Oklahoma, Moonlit Massacre, quick synopsis. In the summer of 1978, 6 employees of a sirloin stockade buffet restaurant found themselves forced into a walk-in freezer during a robbery and then executed, leaving no witnesses. The shocking events and resulting 9-month nationwide manhunt left a deep scar in the psyche of Oklahoma City residents and served as an inspiration for this new novel coming from English professor and OKC City Council person, James Cooper. Moonlit Massacre, again, as I said, is James's debut novel, and it draws inspiration from one of Oklahoma's most notorious crimes, as well as other unsolved murders in the same time frame, all knit together a story of a community gripped with fear. And one thing that's notable, also listed here, is that rather than focusing on the assailants, as we often do in true crime type or true crime adjacent stories, James is exploring a young city rocked by tragedy. So James, you have been put in the work here in Oklahoma City specifically for so long. You were a film critic, then a professor, OKC City Council person, and now an author. This has been quite a journey, and you were talking about this at your book reading the other night. Why did you decide to tell this specific story for your debut novel?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for each of you taking time to join the other day for the launch event. That was magical to see your faces there. And the rest of our bodies, of course.
Yes.
For that part.
It's pretty fun.
It's okay if you want to single us out in that crowd. I know your eyes went directly to us, but go ahead.
Well, they kind of did, actually. Because of our just film critic backgrounds together. Columbine is, an event that really got me to this book. When I was a junior at Choctaw High School, that happened in April of '99, the school shooting. And, actually, you two will maybe appreciate this more than most people. And I've told this story before, but the month before in March was the second advanced screening of a film I had ever seen. The first one was Ever After, the Drew Barrymore.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Laurent's like, I know. Which is actually better than it has any right to be.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But then the next one was my best friend Charity, who came in from Austin with her husband Phil. We were next door neighbors since we were 15. She and I and my younger sister Susan had won tickets to go see The Matrix.
Oh, wow. Now, that is a lottery winner right there.
It was, talk again about magical. We went to AMC Quail Springs, drove out there, got there right as the movie was starting, which means we had to sit on the front row, looked up on the screen, and everyone's like watching something happen and we don't know what they're doing. And then finally, I think Susan or Charity just points to the left and goes, look, and up. And we saw like a flashing computer type thing in the far top. Like that's how much on the front row we were. And so we leave the movie afterwards, love it. And I will never forget this. We walk across the parking lot and I turned to Charity and said, that was a really good Keanu Reeves movie. And he's not really had a lot of good movies lately. That's too bad. No one's ever going to watch this movie.
Oh, wow. Hate those words, huh? Wow.
Wrong I was. So imagine my surprise when that becomes a phenomenon and when it becomes a scapegoat when Columbine happens, right? When people start blaming it because Dylan and Eric wore those long coats. And it wasn't just The Matrix, as you'll recall. It was the first-person shooter game, Doom. It was Biggie and Tupac. It was Marilyn Manson. It was horror. It's always horror.
Always the outcasts. It's the marginalized people. That it's the immigrants. It's the yes. So I knew they were wrong, but I didn't know how. And so initially went to Rose State. I was going to do film studies, production, wanted to do a film or a script, but went to Rose for Gen Ed, OCCC to learn film production. So we just started a new film program back in 2001, Fritz Kearse, Children of the Corn, Gray Fredrickson, Godfather, and learned how to do that. But that's more Laurent's territory than mine, the production side of things, like the film production. But a script I had written at the time was pretty well received. And so then took a year off, got to OU and started focusing on media violence. Like what are the root causes of real life crime and violence and what are the actual effects of these images on our heads? I've spoken in some ways about this as a guest on this show previously, but now it's like coming home to roost. Wanted to do an academic book. Like in 2006, I literally told my best friend Austin, I'm going to be an adjunct professor. I don't care about money, and I'm going to write an academic book on media violence. And he's like, cool, dude. And then went to OSU to learn how to do that. And then in 2012, after I'd finished in 11, Twitter, I didn't trust it. YouTube was like cool for music videos, but I don't trust this thing. I've been a film critic for those years, a fellow Oklahoma Film Critic Circle member. But I am an opinion columnist at the O'Colly, and I was like, I don't think people need to hear from me anymore in terms of opinion, whether it's on film or politics. And I also think that it's just going to get swept up in a lot of noise. That was really my worry. I was like, my voice is just going to get swept up in 168 characters. I was really worried about these new platforms. And so I spent 2012 just going, I don't know what to do. And it was after I'd done a 2-part history piece on OKC's LGBT history for the Gazette. And my buddy Atlee was like, people around here want to hear about themselves, James. You should think about that. And I was like, huh. And then I remembered as a child hearing a story of people rounded up and put into a walk-in freezer and shot to death on the south side of Oklahoma City. And no one had done a big movie or book on it. And I said, give it, I got it.
That's a really great point because you're able to bring a perspective of you're a horror fan, you're an Oklahoman. You actually put in the time. You're like, I want to write a book, so I guess I should figure out how to write. You know, a lot of people just jump right to the writing and they aren't actually very good at it. So
lessons learned.
One of the things that's compelling that sticks out to me is, whereas people like me were like, yeah, Twitter's scary, must engage to stay relevant. You're like, I'm going to take that energy and channel it into something long form that's bigger picture, more more well thought out, that's frankly going to live on a lot longer than tweets, as we've seen with recent Twitter. But anyway, I just have to say it's a real testament to you having the foresight to think ahead and bring all these different unique experiences that you have to a book.
I'm currently halfway.
You're halfway.
I'm halfway through.
So the manuscript was so different in terms of the page numbers and stuff.
Okay.
So when you say, so I'm still learning right now what is what.
Yeah.
After this has been laid out. So when you say halfway, are you at part 2 yet? Because it's 2 parts in the book.
I am
Without
on
spoiling.
page 87. So tell me where that's
You please
at.
continue your question as I look at that.
But the thing that comes to mind whenever I'm reading this, the word that I keep coming back to is the word enveloping. And it's interesting to me because one thing that I think of when I think of you, and even when I think of myself sometimes, is that we come from academia, so there's a lot of that jargon that kind of gets, kind of baked into the way that we approach a lot of projects. So I worried whenever I was turning over to screenwriting if I was going to be able to be cinematic, if I was going to be able to not make it feel documentary style necessarily, but to make it feel like it was, this was a real world, but it has that again, enveloping kind of quality to it. And as I've been reading this, what I've learned is that doesn't seem to be a pitfall that you've fallen into. Are you open to the idea of seeing this world adapted into a feature film?
To write this book, and it was actually a version of your question at the launch that's related to this, which was, I come from a film background and film studies and poli-sci, and that first page was one of the most difficult things I have ever done in my whole life because I was thinking camera angles, right? Like, what do you start on? Do you start on, the close-up of someone's hand? Do you start on a big sky? What do you do? Is it a wide shot? Is it a close-up? Is it a medium close-up? Where does the camera move? What does it need to be on?
Yeah.
And I'm also glad you mentioned the academic language that from which you and I derive. I knew our state's reading scores.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, I think the media here they don't say it right. They always say only 26% of 4th and 8th graders are reading at grade level. Well, I just flipped that around and I'm like 74 to 75% of our students at 4th and 8th grade are not reading at grade level.
Yeah.
And so I could be mad about that, or I can meet people where they are.
Sure.
And so I was very intentional. This is why, to let you in on the backstory, this is why when I was at OSU doing the master's in English and screenwriting, this is why I started working at the school paper, because I wanted to always make sure my writing was as accessible as possible. And so when you're writing for a paper, it's journalism. You can't use highfalutin.
Yes, exactly. It's a weird world to live in because I am very flowery with language. That's why I just go ham on all of my film reviews, adjectives, because I'm not allowed to do that with journalism. For the longest time, it was like stick to the facts, just cut the fat, and just like and I can do it, but I don't really enjoy it. But I do enjoy what it facilitates for people. So when I get to do creative writing, it's really where I feel like I'm actually being myself.
Well, and it was interesting because I observe your writing, and when I've seen you write, I was like, oh man, he's gonna hate this book because it's not flowery. Like the prose is very stark. It is very it's very to the point. It wasn't just the camera angles on that first page. Ultimately, it was like, no, every word matters here.
Yeah.
I never wrote a sentence before completing, in my mind, the last one. Like the previous sentence had to be as close to perfect as possible. Every word, and you all will get this as film people in a way that maybe literature people won't. There's no offense to them, but you saw A Single Man, right?
Mm-hmm. Love A Single Man.
When I saw
it was your backdrop on Facebook for a long time. Maybe still is. I don't know.
Still,
okay.
That's how much I think that film slaps. Like when I saw that at Circle Cinema in Tulsa in 2010, I was in the program at OSU, the English and Screen Studies. So we were pretty deep into philosophy and these sorts of things. And when I saw that film, I was like, this fashion director has understood that every single shot
matters.
Every shot
has weight. Yeah.
And understood that, when I was an undergrad, I don't know when you were doing this with film studies, but they had taught us that editing is like a shot plus a shot plus a shot equals a meaning. And what Tom Ford reminded us when you watch A Single Man is like, no. Within a single frame is a sentence. Like that the posters or the things you put in the background, those allusions, those references are telling you how to think about theme, about characterization of place or of people, and can carry a whole weight of ideas.
Yeah.
And so, slow cinema is a genre that does this really well. No Country for Old Men. And I just said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that on the page.
So, I noticed that when you were reading the other night, it is to the point, but also descriptive. Like, I feel like I'm there when you do such a good job sort of setting the scene. And I'm not saying like you get into every minuscule detail. You just hit on the details that really communicate very efficiently as a film person.
And I'm going to push back on it not being cinematic or not being something like that I would enjoy reading, because that is how I read it. I mean, and maybe it's not intentional on your part, but I do feel like in some ways it's like the language is so dense, but it's textured. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of smell the must in the room. And that sort of, you know what I mean? Like it's that detailed. But something that it reminds me of, you mentioned a couple of other books, but it actually reminds me a lot of The Killers of the Flower Moon in terms of like it's unfolding a crime, but there are characters contained within this historical piece of work. And even though this is kind of an amalgamation of different things, it unfolds that way. And it still has a forward momentum that feels like a film. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what I'm saying it might be difficult to adapt, but I could imagine that making a really good film. So,
well, I appreciate that. And that is going back to your original question about, do I envision it in this sort of, cinematic way? I think someone could, but I think that one of the things I had so much fun with, and this being on page 87, like I love the way the words often in this book look beside each other. Like there was sometimes very intentional, like this word needs to be beside this. It I don't know, it's aesthetically pleasing, the design. And so I guess that would be kind of a worry I have about an adaptation is like, can a director recreate that sort of,
they would have to collaborate with you. I would have to say that you would have to be at the very least a producer, if not a co-writer on it. But yeah, I just think it's a very vivid world. And I think that, you've done so much work in it. It feels that the weight of it is there. You know what I mean? Like, so, and it constantly surprises you because you're so in the space. You're just there and you're like, you're admiring the scenery, and then suddenly something happens and you're like, oh, I was so lost
interesting.
in this world that now something tense or something terrifying has happened, and I'm now, and that's a good position to be in as a writer, because it means you really are able to grip people in that way.
You describe the place very efficiently. It's the small details you choose to call out that help. And again, this is the moviegoer in my brain. Maybe it's just like, oh, you're talking about this store that's got these posters in it. I've been in that store. I know what this is. And like, but you don't spend like 2 pages doing that. It's like you do it like in 2 sentences, but it's very efficient. And I don't know, maybe it's not cinematic, but you do a great job at really creating a place that I feel like I'm living in almost immediately, which I do feel like some of the best films are able to achieve that as well.
Yeah.
But,
I'll push back to my own thing I said earlier to kind of clarify and agree with you. Like, yeah, this is a deeply cinematic book.
Okay.
Right? It's deeply cinematic in terms of that visual style, like what it's doing in terms of creating a sense of place. I only just meant that I don't know, can someone recreate that? And the image I keep seeing in my head is actually the opening of No Country for Old Men. Like, I'm like, well, yeah, I think they could, right? Because I think just I've studied it with my students, the literal opening of that film where you just see the mountains and the stuff, like that tells you everything you need to know.
Well, on the note of cinematic, of course, film critic that you've been, people have heard you on the show a few times. You dedicated the book to Mom, Marion, My Students, OKC's Ward 2, and, of course, Wes Craven.
I chuckled.
I did
I chuckled
chuckle.
because
Many
like
people.
that.
Why did you all laugh?
I loved it.
Many people in the crowd did.
Because it, like you said, that shot in No Country for Old Men says everything you know about the movie. That said everything you need to know about you.
No, like, that's what I'm saying. It was funny because I was like, oh,
I get
of course.
it. That makes, of course, I know him. This makes total sense.
It hits like
Ward
immediately.
2, Wes Craven, and Mom. Yeah, of
it's
course.
perfect.
It makes sense. It encompasses it. Yeah.
So maybe for our listeners who don't know you as well as LaRon and I do, though,
That's fair.
What influence would you say? It could be any cinema, but specifically, the Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, Master of Horror has had on the story that you're telling with Moonlit Massacre.
I think something I'm excited about with my therapist right now is that, like, with this book coming out and you all reading it, I feel like it will provide people who've met me as a professor but don't know my counsel work, or maybe who know me from my counsel work and don't know me as a film professor, an English professor, or people who know me, just the different parts. I think finally I feel like a whole person. I don't know what else to tell you all. I just feel like a whole person. Wes Craven was an English and philosophy professor before he was a Nightmare on Elm Street director or Last House on the Left. So
Can't believe I didn't know that. Go ahead.
And what do I do now, right? I'm the artist in residence in English. How do I teach film and stories? Through philosophy and psychoanalytic theory and these things. So, and that could have only happened because when I was 5, I saw Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 for the first time with my older half sister. My father, who's into Westerns, and thusly is how I got my James Fenimore Cooper name, he, not the biggest fan of my dad. He passed away from alcoholism because he drank himself to death. However, credit where it's due. When I was a child at that young age, I'm telling you, like, I don't even think 6, some of his friends came over and said, or my dad said, Jamie knows, my dad's name was James also, so it's my name. Jamie knows who directed Nightmare on Elm Street. And they go, what's a director? And then he's like, it's whatever. And so, and then he said, watch this. And I told him, Wes Craven. My dad pushed into the VHS player, Nightmare on Elm Street, and played just the opening credits and then proved me right. And they were like, what? So from that moment, like from around that moment, I already knew I wanted to be a storyteller. I just thought maybe it was scripts or directing. I knew I wanted to be a teacher and I knew I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know how to do it all yet. But I didn't know when I was 5 or 6 that he had been an English and philosophy professor. But now it just all makes sense. It's like that moment just set me on this path of the person you see before you. So yeah, I think Nightmare has a lot of relation to this book insofar as it's on Elm Street. Is that right? Nightmare on Elm Street? Just making sure. Couldn't remember. And so that makes that movie very much about a place. Mm-hmm. It is about a neighborhood. It is about things the parents did that they do not want to discuss with their children to protect them, they think, right? I will not spoil anything about this book, but I will say that some of that is in this book in terms of like, parent, I will protect you, you know? And it's like, oh, actually, I don't know that the action you're taking is the right protective action, right? And so, yeah, and then Scream, I think, began to teach me how to make references, allusions to earlier text, but purposeful. I think I'm not a Stranger Things fan whatsoever. I am just in total shock by its popularity. And the thing I really dislike about that show is it makes these references, but it doesn't seem to know what to do with them thematically.
Yep.
And that's, so Scream taught me, you put Halloween in your film, you're doing it on purpose. There's something you're wanting us to think about. So like when Sydney pushes the TV onto Stu and it's Jamie Lee Curtis with the knife on screen and she's pushing that is literally her as the final girl embodying Jamie Lee Curtis as the final girl. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's friggin' smart.
I love it. Well, we're about out of time. LaRon, did you want to close us out? Last question.
Last question, if you can give me your abbreviated version, because you spoke so eloquently at the launch, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you again because not everyone listening was there. We all know you personally, and some of us know you professionally, and you did a lot of research on this story. What did it reveal about yourself?
Well, and then I would even say, because, of course, I have to slow that down and deflect. No, I think it also revealed a lot to me about this place. And that's something I didn't say that night. It revealed to me that the 20th largest city, 6th fastest growing, has been so ignored for so long. And we just don't tell stories about queer people. We don't tell them. Really, you mentioned Killers of the Flower Moon. How long has it been since? I mean, that is such an anomaly, It's such an anomaly. Black folk from here. I mean, where's Clara Luper's novel, movie, even a Lifetime movie I'd take? It's just not, it just doesn't exist. And so this research on the murders, on Oklahoma history, Oklahoma City history, earlier on LGBT history, all of it just taught me that this is a place worth fighting for, but articulating why. And the only way we can do that is through telling our respective stories. That was a huge revelation. What it taught me is that this place had done a kind of piss poor job at teaching me about our home.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think it allowed me to kind of fracture, to be a closeted gay kid, bullied gay kid. And so when I got to page 1 and tried to come up with those, like I said, camera angles, as you heard me say the other night, there was just so much like internal imposter syndrome as I was, failing to get it right. It was like, oh, great. And I'm going to be an alcoholic just like my dad, or Jack Torrance in The Shining, right? Also a writer.
We're also tortured.
Yeah. Something about that. So, I mean, it really was. I just had this moment of just being like, I'm a failure. I had lost the city council election when I was writing this book. Like what is part 1 in the book, that was the first 110 pages at the time of the MFA of the thesis. Wow. And so I was doing that while I was running for council against my predecessor because of his anti-map stuff. And so I mean, it was a brutal time. Like I was running for an election, losing an election, but it all ultimately just taught me that, like, when I started going to Clarity Coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning as someone who had usually woken up like 10 o'clock a.m., I was like, I'm going to do that because if I don't tell this story, if I don't prioritize waking up and writing before I do anything else, no one else is going to do this. Like, they're just not going to do it. Why would they?
Yeah.
And so it was just like, I'm going to prioritize being a writer. And here we are.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Same. And congratulations. This is a huge work of passion. And I want to reiterate what I said earlier. And even speaking to the point about you feel like yourself, the thing that speaks to me about this book, haven't finished it, I'm working on it, but it feels so you, like only you could have written this book. Like it brings in all these different things I know about you into one place, and I think that feels really realized in a way that only James Cooper could do it. So just congratulations.
Absolutely. Because you could cover, like you said, you can cover all of this material. Someone else could do that, certainly. But and maybe even make a somewhat decent book out of it. But it's truly because it's being told through your lens at this particular place in your time, and then in time in your life and an experience that it really is going to, I think, resonate in a deeper way for maybe communities that wouldn't otherwise, think to look forward.
So I appreciate that. The only other thing I would note is the cover for me. Garrett Young did the cover. He was a local queer artist who now is in Baltimore. He was, hand to God, the only person I would have asked to do this. I didn't tell him what to do. I just said, read this book and tell me, and then you do it. And then he's like, oh, okay, here it is. And he's like, what do you think? And I gay gasped when I saw it.
It's very
I was
intriguing.
Like, what are you doing? So I'm just really grateful to him and David Woods for designing the layout of the book, and Charles at Literati and Chloe and his team there who edited it and just got it to this moment where it's a literal actual book instead of a PDF file. And then again, I'm just grateful to I felt so bad. And now I think you'll understand it, Caleb, more. I felt so bad for so long that I wasn't doing film reviews with, but I thought that the only way I was going to be able to really be the advocate I needed to for OFCC as an institution was if I could pull this off.
Absolutely.
Like, it was just, I knew any reviews I wrote were just going to be slapdash. And, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it was like, no, I deserve better. People deserve better. And so now it's just so nice to see, Laron, congratulations, being a new member.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think voted on. You don't just get on there. So I think that's really great. And I'm just really excited to see where you all take us now as an organization. So.
And James, thank you for the work that you did, instrumental work in reestablishing the organization. And again, like I said, the value this brings to Oklahoma film criticism, I think, speaks for itself.
I'm sorry. Brandy McDonald wrote one of the best articles I have ever seen on this book. I mentioned that because she, thank you for the compliment. She and George Lang were just instrumental at my side in reestablishing that group. And so to see her be the one to write this article, like, that's going to mean so much to my mom.
Yeah.
Well, that is, the book is Moonlit Massacre. If you're here locally in Oklahoma City, Literary Press, as we already mentioned, the bookstore, look on bookshelves. And this is a couple places people can buy it online, right, James?
So my strong advice right now, we have sold out a couple times, and so we're printing the next one. And jfcauthor.com. Just go to jfcauthor.com and you can reserve it, and we'll mail it to you. So don't worry about that. And then, I think if you actually just kind of Google online right now too, the title of the book, there's some other bookstores that are carrying it, and some local bookstores are going to have more. And then Second Story, I will be there on November 9th. From 5 to 7. That's on the east side. And there's more to come in the following weeks.
All right. So listeners, you can check out James on social media for more of those book reading announcements. All right. Well, James, I'm really glad we have a little bit more conversation left for you. We're going to be talking with you in our first review of the day, which is The Substance. So listeners, we're going to kick off into our a series of reviews. We're going to be doing several shorter form, spoiler-free reviews. So unlike our normal deep dives, these will be short reviews where we'll recommend the film, as we always do, using a letter grade. In addition, to properly celebrate spooky season, we're going to add what I'm calling the little spooky rating of 1 to 5 for each movie, 1 being not scary at all, 5 being viscerally terrifying. And our first review up is going to be The Substance.
People always ask for something new. It's inevitable. At 50, well, it stops.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself? Younger, more beautiful, more perfect. One single injection unlocks your DNA and will release another version of yourself.
So according to IMDb, The Substance is described as a fading celebrity takes a black market drug, a cell-replicating substance that temporarily creates a younger, better version of herself. A couple of things to note about this film is written and directed by Coralie Fargo. I said that right. Also directed Revenge. It stars Demi Moore. Hello, Demi Moore-assance, as Elizabeth Sparkle, Margot Qualley as Sue, and Dennis Quaid as Harvey. Fun fact, Harvey was originally supposed to be played by Ray Liotta, I discovered looking at this movie. This is the first film theatrically distributed by Mubi in the U.S., and it was released on Friday, September 20th. And it had an estimated budget of $17.5 million and has to date grossed $31.4 million, which is fairly solid business. That said, let's get into our reviews. James, special guest, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on The Substance?
So, love the demi Sant. Is that what you're calling it?
Yeah.
Demi-sance.
Demi-sance. Okay. And I'd forgotten how much I loved her in a movie that I think is dreadful, which is the second Charlie's Angels.
Yeah.
But she's just like
She's
a
fantastic.
presence on screen.
Oh, yeah.
So is shirtless Justin Theroux.
Always.
Yeah. So all those images came back to me seeing Demi on screen. So I think she's just seeing her there is just a welcome. I didn't like this film. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll let you all take it from there.
Well, Laurent, what did you think of The Substance?
I am also very appreciative of the Demi Moore sons, and I did like this film a lot. So I will say that I think that Demi Moore in particular is just such inspired casting for this particular subject matter. As you mentioned, Charlie's Angels 2, Full Throttle. I remember loving that as a kid, and I hate it as an adult now. I realize that, God, I really had poor taste when I was a child, but it's fine.
It was on TV a lot when we were kids. Come on.
Right, exactly. So, but I remember actually there being a lot of conversation about Demi. She was 40 at the time.
Yeah.
It was a big deal that she was this 40-year-old woman, that she was wearing scantily clad. Like the other women were allowed to do it in their 20s and 30s, but for whatever reason, it was offensive for someone of like her to do so. And I thought that was stupid then. But it's also, just something that kind of came to mind as I was watching this, that there's some weird parallels between like her perception as an artist whenever she came out, because she was really trying to break the mold between, she was this really gorgeous woman. Even then she still is, but
Yeah. I mean, she's all like, I'm old now. I was like, I mean, you still look pretty good.
Girl, you look great. You look fine. But yeah, so it's very interesting to see that kind of thinking is still happening in Hollywood. We're still objectifying women. We're still doing this kind of like, and I felt like that, that she probably resonated really deeply with this particular character. And I think it's such a showcase, for people who maybe were living under a rock in the 90s when she was really hot in films. But it's just nice to see her break this kind of mold and do something very primal. This is a merging of two different things for me. This is a merging of that kind of prestige art house horror film that I like, and the schlocky, gory, over the top, disgusting blood fest. It finds an interesting balance with those two things for me. I feel like the extremity in this movie, things get extreme as it goes along, and it just keeps going, and you're at some point you're in disbelief that it's still happening. I just can't believe that this movie is in a mainstream theater for general audiences.
It's pretty wild that it got released, honestly.
And I am giddy on the inside thinking of that middle-aged white couple that's like, let's go see the new Demi Moore movie, and have no context whatsoever for what they're about to watch, because I think that happened 4 or 5 times over in the screenings that I went to see this movie for. I think it's very stylish. I think it's very bold. I think it's messy and it's not perfect, but I had a blast with it. So,
yeah, I mean, I would largely echo the sentiments. I think you said so many things so well. I would kind of liken, I'm not saying it's an apples to apples comparison, but in terms of inspired casting, you pick this actress for this film is almost like when they cast Michael Keaton as Birdman, for example. We are like, oh, well, this movie gets like a whole letter grade bump or a star rating just because you cast this beloved actor in a role about this thing.
yeah.
So I really found that to be inspired casting. And I personally, and I'm maybe just biased because I loved her in The Leftovers and have been all on the Margot Qualley train ever since, but she's not got a lot script wise and does a lot with I mean, both of them, frankly, but like, it's just, she's basically, is like, you want to be objectified. You were going to be objectified woman. That is your role in this movie, and you need to play it up before things kind of go off the rails. And which means she's having to do a lot of stuff that I personally found to be kind of gross and icky a lot of the time. But at the same time, it's all sort of in service of the point, sort of turn back the mirror on, isn't it gross that we're objectifying women? Because I had never sexualized Margot Qualley, like, even though I think she's a very pretty woman, like this movie did. And it's like, it did so to a point that I was like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, and I think she's attractive. Right. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to use an up and coming actress. up against another iconic actress in this role. And I love that the last 20 minutes went balls to the walls,
Just
bananas.
gonzo.
Love it. I don't know if I love it or hate it, honestly, but I love the swing. And certainly didn't expect it to go as hard as it did. James, what do you think?
Just listening to both of you. So like 2 movies just come to mind. I loved Under the Skin.
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, great movie.
Because we were talking about like the nudity, I was not familiar with this other actress. What was her name?
Margot
Qualley. Yeah.
Margot. So I didn't know her, but like, you know, it kind of reminds me of how Scarlett's character in Under the Skin is just like fully nude for
a lot of it.
So are the men. I was happy. Plus, I just think the movie just rules. So getting those vibes and Society, which I had never seen before until maybe about a year or so
I watched
ago.
that in film school, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
what class?
His name is Timothy Shari. He was I don't remember
that.
I don't remember. Well, I don't know how many. I don't remember the course, but I remember it was a late night one that we watched. So yeah.
So like that final 30 minutes that you're talking about, of the Substance is very similar to like almost all of Substance of Society, rather, where it's just like body horror, like in a Cronenberg kind of way.
Very. The Fly can't
very
the line.
The Fly.
Yeah.
I think for me though, you said the word messy. I think this is a very messy film. And like structurally messy. I think the last 15, 20 minutes just feels just kind of, it's like, girl, can we just go and wrap this up? Like, I feel very similarly about like Everything All at Once, where it's like, I thought that movie should have ended the second they became rocks. Like that should have been the end of that film. But it's like, nope, we're going back to the mall. It's like, why? Stop. Oh, Best Picture. Okay.
They went all the way.
Fine. But there was nothing new here. That's why I mentioned Under the Skin and Society. We know that Hollywood kind of sucks when it comes to, not even kind of, just like the representation of women, of our bodies, period. And I kept thinking of American Psycho the whole movie too. I've just seen movies about the objectification of women, Stepford Wives. I mean, it's just so too familiar. And the other one I kept thinking about the whole time, even stylistically, was Requiem for a Dream, and like this the Sarah Goldfarb.
I could see that,
like addiction to television, and then the other characters who are addicted to drugs, what you might call a substance. To me, this stylistically and thematically, and maybe it's also, now that I think about it, who's the actress in Requiem, the dark
Jennifer Connelly.
Long hair,
Demi,
Demi's long black hair. I mean, I just didn't. I was with this movie for a bit because I do think those swings you're talking about are kind of worth our time, and I do think that. I mean, again, I just love seeing Demi on screen.
Yeah. In a meaty role too.
Yeah. But after a while, I just got bored with it felt like the movie was running out of ideas. Like that the only idea it had for us was to let us know, like, women objectification bad. And I'm like, no shit. Like, so, and I'm not saying that just because I know that everyone else does. I'm just saying, like, movies, step up your game and do it in a different way.
What did you think about the use of archetypes? Because I think I've warmed up to it a little bit, but when I saw it the first time, I was like a little iffy. I'm like, I feel like these are archetypes, which in some ways undermines the point you're trying to make because there's like intentionally less nuance. It's like almost like cartoon characters. I've come around to it a little bit more, but I'm curious, what do you think about how and I mean, both of you, like, did that work for you?
I do feel like these were intentional choices. I think a lot of these, I feel like in particular, like the Harvey character.
Yeah, I mean, the sleazy producer named Harvey.
Well, and I mean, listen,
right.
the second that, and I've said this to you off camera, I mean, off the podcast, but the second that Dennis Quaid walks into the bathroom
there it is,
and starts saying his whatever, I was like, yep, and that is exactly the type of person that he is, because I've worked with him on Reagan. So it's like, but you know,
so he is.
I can't. I don't want to, like. I just got invited into the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle. I don't want to shit on a movie that was made in Oklahoma, but I'm just going to tell you that yes, Dennis Quaid is that man.
I wondered when I saw the trailer, it's like, what is this man doing in this movie? And also, do not worry about
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I literally chose Killers of the Flower Moon as one of the most disappointing films last year.
Gotcha.
I think that book is one of the literal best things I have ever read.
Got you. Well, yeah. So he is very much that type of person. So that spoke in a weird way. I was like, this is perfect, and I don't even hate you in this because it's perfect. It's a perfect depiction of who you are, and everything that's wrong with this scenario. Like so. It's definitely a movie that lacks subtlety, but I think that's kind of the point. I don't feel like there's a vein of camp here for sure, like throughout, like where there's like it's right under the surface. Everything's very kind of stark, and like you get those liminal spaces. There's a lot of references to like The Shining. I saw a lot of playbacks like that hallway, the bathroom, Psycho's in there a lot, whatever. But these are movies that are referenced a lot. But I felt like, and first of all, like what this apartment that she's in is ginormous. It's the most obnoxious. I was like, where does this exist? Like she walks in and it looks like we're in a 3-story mansion, but it's actually just,
well, so I have opinions of, I don't, because we're, trying to keep it brief, but I will say, I wish the one thing that movie did that really kind of saved it for me, I think, was the movie doesn't let her off the hook either. Yes, you're being objectified.
Yeah.
Yes, the system is terrible, but also you decided to buy into it.
This is true. And
the last shot, we won't spoil what it is, but the way they bookend it, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was worried that the movie was going to get her a get out jail free card, as in, oh, women are just victims of the system, which is true. But also there are several times where she's presented with clear outs.
Yeah,
and
options
to not live that lifestyle that she wants.
That's the idea in this that I found that I mulled on the most, is that this movie, as much as it is about the objectification of women, it's also about the violence that we inflict on ourselves. And I appreciated that notion, that idea, because it is like she knows that she can stop this. She knows like there's before it goes to where it goes, and we all know where it goes.
Listeners, you're not ready. No matter how ready you think you are.
Let's just say there was a finger on the pulse sort of moment where we could have said to yourself, like, okay, yeah, this is the moment that you have an option and a way out of this situation. But being addicted to that perception, addicted to the idea of being seen a certain way. She's tired of seeing herself the way that other people do now. So it's like she's addicted to everyone's, in a weird way, she's addicted to the objectification as she gets younger. So
that's her whole identity
is kind of placed around it. And I found that, in a weird way, just kind of quietly tragic. And I felt like the last stretch of it really, really, emphasizes and footnotes that point. And I did think the last shot itself is really powerful, I thought.
Yeah. Hearing you say all that, I will say that is the strongest aspect of the movie, is that she is every bit as complicit.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's the Patrick Bateman American Psycho part of it, for me. And I would say that is an intriguing part of the film. I also, the Dennis Quaid of it all. I've kind of seen that character like in the Tappy Tippins, in Requiem for a Dream.
Oh yeah.
Like the absurdity, the Juice by Tappy. there were things I will tell you. I said this to you all already, but before we were recording, but when I left that movie, it was like a handful of us. And two of my really good friends were, well, what you think of the movie? And I have decided now when I leave movies to not share my opinion. So I don't watch trailers anymore, and I don't tell people my opinion unless they invite me on a podcast.
Noted.
And one thought it was pretty good, and one literally hated this film. And to watch them go at each other was a whole thing. So
I think that's what I wrote in my review. It was like, this movie is going to be adored and hated with fervent passion.
Yes,
from two sides, and there's going to be no like middle ground.
The one thing we can all say we have in common is at least we have strong feelings about the movie one way or another.
Yeah, you didn't leave it like, I don't know. Yeah,
but I will say, to your point about is it movie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, movie. Yeah,
I did love, because normally we see that logo during screener season. For us, we get to see that at home. It was a treat to for a movie to begin at Tinseltown
and say,
and just be like art film. It's like, well,
look at us.
And is any complaint I have with it, the fact that a movie like this got a wide distribution and did not totally, yes, it didn't make huge money, but it also didn't cost huge money, and it more than doubled its budget. I'm like, that's a win. I'll take it, you know? Well, we're about out of time on this film, but before we go, let's go with letter grade recommendations for The Substance. LaRon Chapman, what letter grade are you giving the film?
I'm high on this movie, even with some of the messiness of it. Like, it's something that I'm excited to rewatch. It's something I had a blast. It's something I'm excited to show to people who've never seen it. It's definitely a crowd pleasing kind of audience film. And
crowd pleasing?
I say crowd pleasing. Let me put it this way: it's one that you'll get a reaction with the crowd. Okay. They won't sit neutrally, like what you know, like fair. So I'm gonna give this an A. I really enjoy it. I'm very excited for Demi Moore. I'm already starting the grassroots Oscars campaign for her first nomination ever by the Academy.
Oh wow!
I would enjoy that. She would never win, and the Academy is not cool enough to do this. But you never know. I mean, crazier things have happened in the past recently. So all I want is her to get that 5th slot, so she can have, so we can have a horror actress get a nomination. Because
I take that as a win.
The fact that Toni Collette didn't, I'm just saying.
Travesties.
There's so many other examples, but yes.
All right, LaRon gives it the highest recommendation. James Cooper, what letter grade would you give the film?
Wait, so what grade did you say?
I gave it an A.
You're an A. It's a solid A.
A solid A, not A+.
I guess not A+.
Not A+.
He's very close to the highest recommendation.
Wait, do you all give A pluses?
We do.
We could.
We could. We did.
I don't done it before?
I don't think we have. It's an option. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe in A pluses.
You don't believe in perfect.
Well,
that's
I guess
fine.
believe's not the right word because they exist.
Exist. Yeah.
Like, no matter if I believe in them.
I guess I would say those 5 out of 5, those Pantheon movies that
I would call an air quotes perfect movie, not as in it's technically unflawed, as in like Jurassic Park or something. Like, it's like, well, there's not really a lot you could change to make this movie better.
Something that stands the test of time. 10, 20 years from now, we're still going to be right. Scream is an example. Like, I don't know if it's a perfect movie, but it is. I mean, it is to me. But I mean, I don't know if most people would say it was a perfect movie. Some people think it's silly, but I'm like, no, it has too much influence, too much weight on the culture to not say that this is not something that is going to be important years to go.
That said, I don't think we've ever given A pluses as I can recall.
Mm-mm.
I'm just an A person. Like, if it's Scream's an A for me,
okay,
right? Godfather 2 is an A. Like, I feel like once you get to A, it's like we have nowhere to go.
We have nowhere to go.
We have nowhere to go.
On your scale, then I'd say it's an A minus.
Oh.
So if we're doing,
he's one step below highest recommendation.
I'm below the highest it can go because it's not perfect, but I do love it.
Interesting. Okay. I think I'm probably a D plus C minus. I'm the C minus because of the Demi. Like, I just having her on screen.
It's a huge booster, right?
And I think having her on screen and just there's a charisma she brings. It's hard to take your eyes off of her. And that's the problem with the movie ultimately is like we lose her for a good chunk.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like a significant chunk.
I mean,
at
half the
end,
movie,
you know, to say nothing of its device of splitting between the two. But I'm like, no, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Go back to her.
So, yeah, I mean, seriously. Yeah, I mean, it's too bad. I would be curious to hear what my friend who loved it. I've not had a chance to talk with him about it yet. So.
All right. I'm going to go with a B. So I'll split the difference a little bit. I really like it a lot. I don't know if it's my highest recommendation, but I do think it's more of it works than doesn't, and it has appreciated since I saw it. When I saw it, I was like, well, that was a fun ride. I'm not really sure how I feel about a lot of the creative choices, but those of the things that have risen to the top are the ending, the casting, and there's a couple other things we didn't have time to talk about, but there's a couple of ideas in there that I'm like, that was a really cool way to do this thing.
Yeah.
Thematically. So for that, it gets a B. I really like it a lot. Not quite love, but I could be persuaded to watch it again with a very large group of people. That would be it. Yeah. On the spooky scale, really quickly, LaRon, what would you give this on a 1 to 5?
It was interesting, the spooky scale, because this isn't a particularly scary film. It's grotesque and unnerving and gross. So if I'm going to use that as my meter, then it's like a 5 because it is very gross. But if we're going to go with scary, it's probably a 2, maybe.
Yeah.
I'd say a 2. Yeah.
Yeah. James?
I just don't think it's scary, but I will say it's uncomfortable with a lot of the body stuff, and it made me think like
The makeup though. We at least think
again, I keep thinking society.
That's some good makeup. Yeah.
I don't know, 1.5.
1.5. I went back and forth on this too because I also don't think it's scary. I gave it 4 out of 5 for visceral thrills. On scares, yeah, 1.5. It's not.
I don't.
scary.
But to be fair, I don't think it's going for that. Either.
No. It's a body horror in the sense that's trying to gross you out, not necessarily keep you awake at night thinking about being haunted by whatever. Well, hey guys, this is all we have time for with The Substance. Laurent and I are going to be right back in a second with Speak No Evil. However, James Cooper will be sadly leaving us. James, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people follow you, your work, and the book?
I'm hanging out on Instagram, which is James for OKC, and then on Facebook at James for OKC. And again, people can get the book at jfcauthor.com. And if they ever have specific Ward 2 questions, you can just email ward2@okc.gov.
Awesome. Well, again, congratulations on the book launch, and thank you so much for everything you're doing here for film in Oklahoma.
Yes, it's always a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for being in community with me, guys.
This is my husband, Ben.
Patrick Feld, this is my wife, Kira.
This is Agnes.
And has some trouble communicating. He can be a bit insecure.
Nice Vespa. Yeah, isn't she? You should try.
Yeah,
I won't call the fun police if you don't.
Okay.
Io lo so che mi chiami anche da diversi fusi orari. Ieri siamo stati esagerati.
Back before I quit my practice. You're a lawyer. Doctor, listen, you have to come and visit. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah? Yeah. Done.
It's so quiet around here. Do you even have any neighbors?
Hey, you made it!
Welcome.
Ta-da!
You are VIP guests.
So according to IMDb, Speak No Evil is described as a family is invited to spend a whole weekend in a lonely home in the countryside, but as the weekend progresses, they realize that a dark side lies within the family who invited them. So a few fun facts about this film. This is actually, and you know, Lauren, I'm calling this out because a surprising number of people I've talked to did not realize this. This film is a remake of a 2022 Danish film of the same name, so it came out just a couple of years ago. We'll talk about it, but maybe you should also check that one out. This remake is directed by James Watkins. He's done a handful of movies. The one that I think might be most recognizable to horror fans is The Woman in Black, about 12 or so years ago. This film stars James McAvoy as Patty, Mackenzie Davis as Louise, Scoot McNairy as Ben, and Aisling Francosi, I'm saying her name wrong, as Ciara. Also, just to say, as a big Halt and Catch Fire fan, it was so great to see Scoot McNairy and Mackenzie Davis sharing the screen again. Shout out to all my Halt and Catch Fire friends out there. The film was released on Friday, September 13th. That's right, Friday the 13th. And it had an estimated budget of $15 million and has grossed $73.9 million worldwide to date. LeRon Chapman, you and I have talked a few times about the original 2022 film.
Yes.
What did you think of this remake?
I have been dreading first of all, this is the trailer that I never need to see ever again.
Yeah.
Like you could not escape this trailer. They didn't really change it up any, so
it was a bad trailer.
And it's not a really good trailer if you've seen the Danish movie.
Right.
You feel like it's telegraphing or outright just exposing way too much information that's kept it, very under the radar with that particular one. So I had actually been dreading this one. With the exception of the fact that I do love James McAvoy and would watch anything that he's in.
That's where the conflict is. You're like, I don't want to see this movie, but James McAvoy looks like he's having a good time.
He looks like he's having a good time, and generally speaking, American remakes of better foreign horror films is normally dead on arrival. And considering the proximity in which the last one just came out, as you mentioned, just 2 years ago, it felt very much like this feels cash grabby to the highest order. Like it just doesn't feel like something that we need right now and anyone asked for. Because I will say, as I do really like the Danish film, but I will say it goes under the category of movies that made me feel like shit afterwards that I never want to rewatch.
100%. 100%.
So
miserable movie,
misery porn, well made,
so good.
Never
watch
want to
again.
Never watching it again. Never watching it again. So there's another element of that, like even knowing that about that film, and then saying, okay, do I really want the American version of the movie I don't want to rewatch? You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of reasons why this shouldn't work, and to my surprise, this film has a lot more fun with some of the themes and the notable sequences from the original film that I think makes it more palatable to a general mainstream audience. There are things in this movie that I could rewatch this one in particular,
100%,
because
I could recommend this one very easily to a lot of people.
A lot of people who like these kinds of horror films in general. The other one, not so much. It would be for a very specific niche group of people who I know can handle, they're not going to be mad at me for recommending them something that's going to make them feel like shit. Like this one actually has some humor into it. They've infused that. In very subtle ways. There is a lot of similarities in the shots and some of the things that obviously some of the events that occur, with the exception of,
well, I think we can say without spoiling that the ending of this one is definitely different than the ending of the original film. And you and I had talked about this. There's a couple different ways you can look at it. I think the way I'm choosing to look at it, and it sounded like you as well, is it's more complementary to the original rather than the opposite of the original. It's still kind of, it's more digestible, even though it's still kind of dark.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all I'll say. But
well, something I will say is, when you go to the doctor and they ask you, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your pain level? You know what I mean? And you're always a little dishonest about it because you want them to give you the good stuff. Like, I would say, like, with the original, like, you give me the hardest core drugs you got to numb this pain. With this one,
I need antidepressants after that one.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, and this one is more like, this is a lower intensity version of that same thing, but still works in the ways that the other one did, maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but in a way that, again, is more malleable, more palatable for people who just want to have a good time with the material that's also, difficult subject matter. So
agreed. And I really have to say, in general, the movie has more fun, but man, so much of that is James McAvoy.
Mm-hmm.
He really, especially in the last act of this movie, he is just hamming it up.
Yeah.
But he never, and though it's a little, it's very heightened, it still feels pretty compelling and pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
It's kind of cartoonish. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's all grounded. They've done such a good job setting up that character and this world and this dynamic with the four main characters that it still feels very scary in that way. Like, this guy, you don't want to mess with this guy. He's so crazy. He'll do what he's going to do.
Crazy things.
Yeah.
And there are sequences in this, like, just like the suspense is sustained very well. So it's directed very well. And James Watkins, who did, as you mentioned, The Woman in Black, but the film that I remember him from, which also goes in the category of movies that made me feel like shit that I'll never watch again, and Craig hates me for ever showing it to him, was Eden Lake.
Oh.
And this is a good horror film. I felt like stars Michael Fassbender and Kelly Riley. One of those backwoods horror movies where everything horrible is happening. You meet the wrong crop of people, and it's a night of hell to kind of survive. And it just ends on such a depressing note that you walk away just like, man, I didn't get any emotional catharsis from this. And I feel like this movie finds a way to do that while still hitting home on the message that it's trying to say about complicity and standing up for yourself and the sacrifice that comes with, and somehow the violence that occurs when you allow people to walk over you. And allow people, like, there is such thing as being too polite to the point where it's to your detriment, where you do need to say something, otherwise people will take advantage of that aspect of you.
I was talking, in no way related to a real life thing that I've experienced recently. Me and my wife were talking about this idea that at a certain point, if you do not tell a person no, or you allow someone who seeks harm upon you in your life, you are just as culpable and responsible for any sort of negative thing that occurs, because you saw it coming, but said you'd rather be polite
than offend somebody.
Someone.
Even if what they're doing is offensive or
and you know,
bad
and even if you know that they are out to get you, but you'd rather it's a thing. People you can push you pretty far. So
the fear of confrontation, and it's a real thing. And I'm not saying it's easy. I deal with it myself, particularly in the workspace. Just find that balance between standing up for yourself and saying, you know, what you will not tolerate, and setting boundaries with certain people while still being professional. And there is a delicate balance of that, especially if you have someone that's egotistical and is willing to exploit that kind-hearted part of yourself, that they know you'll do whatever I say no matter what. You're not going to combat me about this. And so it gets to the heart of that. And so I see that I have a frustrating experience watching both versions of this movie, because I see that in the characters, and they're so eager to please, and yet so many horrific things have happened that are inexcusable and should not be accepted. And so the movie plays with those very well, I think, in both films. So,
and I think just to add to that too, and another sort of subtopic in terms of comparing this to the original is, in the original film, both couples, there's a Danish couple featured, the protagonists in that one are a Danish couple. In this film, of course, they're Americans living in the UK. Things haven't worked out for them. Mm-hmm. They're very lonely. Like I had a hard time in the original film accepting that you would just go to some home out in the countryside with these strangers you met in Italy one time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a hard time believing that anyone would do that anyway.
Sure.
However, the way they set it up in this film, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
You have this group of people who made a big life-altering move to the UK, to London. Things don't work out. They don't have any friends. Work is not working. They met this one couple in this trip to Italy that seemed really friendly, and they're actually doing all the things. They're following up, sending handwritten letters, and you're like, man, I could use some human connection. And you combine that with, Americans have a reputation for being a little too friendly in your business. I've heard. This does bring an American sensibility that is more relatable to Western audiences for sure. What did you make, Laurent, of some of the differences in terms of, casting Americans as your protagonists in this film?
Yeah, I feel like definitely the dynamic is far more relatable, because we can kind of imprint our polite PC American culture onto this and see like how that dynamic shakes things up from before. But the thing I love about this particular iteration of this story is that there's a joylessness to the other one, which is intentional.
Yes.
Intentional. It's making a very bold statement. But here with this one, there's an element of self-knowing. Even it's like the filmmakers and the writers are aware of the things in the other film that, you know what I mean? That it's aware that you may have seen that film, or it's aware that you know what I mean? That there's certain aspects of it where that humor comes from the knowing that this is a ridiculous situation that we wouldn't, not so much in like a Scream level where we're calling it out with commentary, but it's the subtext is there, where there's a lot of winking, at the camera with that. But I appreciated that, because it did add like a surprising amount of humor to this movie. I laughed way more than I ever did in the other one. So that was an interesting dynamic. And I think that also is kind of an American sensibility brought to this particular material, whereas the foreign version of this was a little more stark and bleak and kind of, so.
Well, the American sensibilities of comedy, even like, when is an uncomfortable situation kind of funny at times?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's well said. Yeah, overall, I would say, just to echo everything you said, I had a lot more fun with this. I'm actually excited to show this one to my wife. I saw it immediately by myself thinking, it's better, like you, no interest in seeing the film. I thought the trailers were terrible because I'd seen the original, and it just looked like they put all the money shots from the original in the trailer. And I was like, well, what's the point of going through this exercise? Right. When I got back from home from this movie, I immediately was like, I really wish my wife would have come with me. I didn't even pitch it to her. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go see this. Yeah. I don't think you'd be interested. And immediately when I got home, I was like, no, super should have taken my wife. She really would have dug it. And I've been recommending this film to a lot of people, because I actually think the way that it's packaged, sure, there are moments that get a little more intense, but I think it's super relatable.
Yeah.
And also, guys, not to be, a fear-mongering person, but, Vacation Friends. I learned by watching both of these movies that apparently that's a thing. By talking to a lot of people just about the idea that's a thing that a lot of people do. I don't make vacation. Laurent, do you make vacation friends?
There are people that you see at the restaurants or the certain spaces you say hi to, but we're not inviting or going over to each other's places.
Definitely not. We're not leaving the neutral space.
No.
Right?
No.
Okay. So number one, I was like, yeah, absolutely not. Number two, I was surprised by the number of people who said, oh yeah, I made great friends on this one vacation. I was like, good enough for if they invited you to go out, would you do it? In
the middle of nowhere, far out when you don't know, in a foreign, no.
So number one, I was surprised by how many people have done that. Well, they say they would do that. Number two, I was like, and now definitely no vacation friends.
Yeah.
Neutral zones only.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you just don't know who you might encounter, no matter how charming they might be up front. Things can go pretty crazy. Well, Laurent, what letter grade would you give Speak No Evil?
I oscillate between a B and a B plus on this one. I think a B is probably fair, but I do find this like heavily rewatchable. And so that makes me think that, it's something that we'll appreciate over time for me. So I think a B for this one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also going to go with a B on this one. And I am eager to watch it. It's one of those movies that it is more fun. And I am eager to see what people think of this movie. Again, the original Speak No Evil. I love it. I think it's incredible. It's impactful. Never want to watch that again. Probably won't recommend it to most people without having a lot of caveats around it.
Absolutely.
This one, I want to recommend to everyone, and I really want to hear what people think, and I especially want to watch it with people because I just think it's, again, crowd pleasing. Yeah. I would say this one's definitely a crowd pleaser in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, yeah.
And how would you rank this on the spooky scale, 1 to 5?
Because it's too real for me. I mean, it's not, I won't say it's outright scary in like a Michael Myers sort of way, but I give this a 3, I would say, in terms of just the scenario itself is scary. And being in that scenario, and I wouldn't be, but if I ever found myself in that scenario, being overly friendly with strangers on vacation and then had the vacation from actual hell, that to me is very triggering and very, that would be uncomfortable for me.
What's scarier? Realizing for them that they're stepping into a bad situation, that first act where you're like, oh, well, this is clearly bad. You don't even know what you're in for. Or is it scarier when they become aware that they're in a bad situation and can't figure out how to get out of it?
Ooh, see, that's like the 12 Years a Slave approach.
Shit.
I use that example a lot because in that Solomon is like, he was a freed slave. And he's aware of the horrors of slavery. And so he knows how bad it is, but he's never himself experienced it in the extremity of it. But then when he's placed in that situation, he is more intellectual and aware of what he's about to experience, where everyone else is accustomed and used to it. It's just all they know. Yeah, it's horrible, but he is about to feel the full weight of it. That's kind of how I look at it. So I think it's worse when they know.
Yeah.
When you're oblivious to it, it's suspenseful for us, the audience. But when they're aware of it and they're having to navigate how to not tip their hat that they know certain things and then also avoid the horrific things about it. Yeah, that's worse for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the vibes in I bring this up because it plays into my spooky rating here. Because yes, you feel the anxiety for them when they're going in. But I think the movie really cooks, and I start to get the most visceral fears is when you're in a situation and you know it's a bad situation and you're trying to get out with some form of dignity.
Yeah.
That's a scary place to be in. But also you know that the other party is actively out to get you.
And there's that psychological dance where you're like, I can't let them know
that I know.
And then there's also that fear, the added fear that maybe they do know that and they're really getting off that and it's even more of a thing for them. And and there's just no way out, maybe.
And then we get after that, you get into the visceral fears of them trying to escape. But I found that second part to be the one where it was really cooking with some fun psychological stuff.
For sure.
So for that, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 as well. You and I share a brain. I think it gets frankly, it gets less scary when they're trying to get out. The thing that's scariest to me is the psychological component, especially in the Act 2, but also a little bit in Act 1.
Yeah.
So that ladies and gentlemen, is Speak No Evil. I need to check. It's probably about to be a VOD if it isn't already. I highly recommend you check that one out. Let's move on to our next film on the menu. This will be the little Twix bar I'm going to pull out of the bucket here. And it's What's Inside.
Well, you had mentioned that we might be playing some games tonight. Do you still want to play? Yeah, I want to play games tonight, man.
Hey, man!
Before I open this suitcase, this is just some needs to stay in this room type shit. So, no phones out or anything, okay?
Bro, that's like telling Nikki not to breathe and shit.
So according to IMDb, It's What's Inside is described as a group of friends who gather for a pre-wedding party that descends into an existential nightmare when an estranged friend arrives with a mysterious game that awakens long-hidden secrets, desires, and grudges. So a few things to know about this film is it is the directorial debut of director Greg Jardin, who worked in marketing at Netflix. It made its debut at Sundance Film Festival earlier this year before being acquired by Netflix for $17 million. It was the largest deal made at this year's festival. And, Laurent, you and I were talking about this off air. I was following some film critics online who were all about the experience of watching this with the crowd, who then, once they found out it was acquired by Netflix, were angry because they were like, this is a crowd pleaser film going experience.
Yes.
That said, Netflix did acquire it. It did not get a theatrical release, and it was released on streaming Friday, October 4th. So, Laurent, tell me, what did you think of It's What's Inside?
This was a really refreshing surprise. I expected to like this based on some of the critics I know who've seen it and have sang its praises, but it was a refreshing surprise because it was tonally different, like vastly different than what I expected to watch, but in a way that was very effective and very just kept me on my toes, like at how intricate the plotting was and how tightly wound it was. And it's a movie that, if I'm going to recommend anything to people, is that memorize people's names quickly.
Very,
very quickly. Memorize their names as fast as you can, because it will enhance the experience of this, because you're probably going to get whiplash from trying to figure out who's talking when at any given time.
Don't be on your phone watching this film.
No.
And if you're going to get on your phone, don't do it in the first 30 minutes.
Yes. And so this is a movie that I wouldn't call, it's not horror. We mentioned it's more horror adjacent. But I feel like the things that are that it's getting at, that is digging at about the human condition, and then about human behavior, especially, like what would you do in this scenario situation?
That's where the fun comes in.
Is so much fun with this in particular, because there's having a commentary on race, it's having a commentary on privilege, it's having a commentary on a lot of these different things, masculinity and femininity, and so I felt like those ideas were so fresh and interesting to be presented the way that they are through the lens in this film. And so it has a very nifty premise and kind of a clever hook that I felt like they really did maximize a lot of this. Given the limited kind of space, it's kind of a 1.5 location sort of movie. And so they find a way that all of the terror and tension that's coming is happening from is a psychological warfare between this very diverse group of friends who are having a reunion.
Yeah. And again, Laurent and I are playing it coy because there's a couple of really key plot elements that you find out about pretty quickly in the movie, but if you know them, it sort of spoils the fun of the movie. So trying to keep it light. I think, Laurent, this movie reminds me, it's a very different movie, mind you. I think they have different goals in the long run, but there is a lot of overlap in my brain, especially with the premise between this and Bodies from a couple of years ago. Like, that was the movie that I made. I was like, oh, I've been here.
And it's a shame that title was gone, because that would have been a much more fun title for this particular.
Both of these movies, you could have reversed the titles.
Yeah,
honestly.
literally,
yeah, and it would work.
But
both of them work. Yeah. But yes, Bodies would in fact work.
Yes,
brilliantly
for this film.
For It's What's Inside. I really liked it. I think the actors do a really great job. They have all of them have a lot of heavy lifting they have to do in the first few minutes, and the script, and also not just the actors. I would also argue the writing, the directing, and the editing in particular. I'm trying to avoid saying any spoilers. It has to be very efficient in communicating, here's who these people are, here's what they're about. It's very important that you know this before we actually get to the thing that we're going to do.
Otherwise you're just going to be lost.
Exactly.
And
they do a lot of really clever, and there's also, again, the editing in particular. I won't say what they do, but they do some really cool editing tricks throughout the movie to help you kind of, and lighting for sure, kind of help keep you on track with, okay, what's going on exactly. Really, really impressive craft. My wife, Lauren, a lot of Lauren name drops. Love you, babe. But she does, video editing full time for her day job. And she's like, this was the creativity behind editing she found to be particularly compelling. And it did work.
Because it's complex, but if you're leaning into it, if you're paying attention, then you can really, like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like chess in a way. It just has this interesting structure to it that, that's it's very robust. But at the same time, if you're paying attention, then all of the little reveals that happen throughout it have a lot of impact.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of weight.
It's a ride.
Yeah.
I had a great time with it. I will say I don't necessarily think it's a huge ding on the movie, especially when you consider I think it was budgeted at like $2.5 million, so not exactly an expensive movie. There's a lot of things with the premise that they could have. It felt like they did. It is a very fun premise. I want to reiterate. I'm not saying that they don't do a lot with it. It's very fun. Given the plot elements they're working with, I felt like they could have taken it a couple steps further. But also, this is an independent first-time feature, so I want to keep that in mind too. The premise is very rich. They do some super fun stuff with it. But if you step back and say they have this thing and they did what with it, it's just kind of like But I don't think that ruins the movie at all. I think this is a blast. I think it's fun. If anything, it makes me really hope this is a hit, so that we get another film, and then the next film is put in theaters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, overall, I think this is a good time. You mentioned it's not a horror. So originally, when we put this on the docket for this episode, because Laurent and I have been scheming on this episode for months at this point, and we weren't sure because the way it was being vaguely described from the film festival, we had both heard rumbles that it was horror adjacent, so we put it on here. It is definitely not a horror movie, though.
It's a thriller.
It's a thriller.
It's a psychological thriller. That's how I would say it. There's nothing horrific outside of the actions of the people in the film.
Yeah, most definitely. With that said, Laurent, what letter grade would you give It's What's Inside?
I'm going to give this a B+. And this is a really solid debut. Very smart, very cleverly constructed. We talk about Hollywood has no more new ideas. This is a merging of, as you mentioned, bodies. I'd even say it had little elements of Talk to Me in it. This party trick that goes, horrifically wrong. What I find really interesting is just the dynamic of this group. It's a reunion, but they all have certain histories, some that we know of, some that we do not. And then finding the subtle and vindictive and conniving ways that they use that information that they know about, that we know about these people, and that these characters know about each other, that makes for some really interesting human drama in the stakes of all of this.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing that's really nice is these characters have all known each other for already in a while, and then again, the script and the performances do a great job at quickly establishing that, and they have a group dynamic that
there's some double crossing, there's some infidelity, there's some vaguely, like I mentioned, there's a subtle commentary on race. What would you do if you had the ability to not be your race? You know what I mean? Like, and how would you exploit that? Or
even though they're all friends, that doesn't mean they all love each other all the time.
Exactly. So found that to be really fun. So yes, I would say a B+. I enjoyed this quite a bit. Yeah.
Man, you and I are just sharing our brain on this, Laurent. We need to disagree more often. I also have this marked as a B+. I think this is absolutely a great time. If you have a Netflix subscription, why haven't you watched this yet? It's not very long. It's like an hour and 40 minutes. It's mean. It's lean. It's got a strong hook. I can't tell you what the hook is, but you'll see it within 10 minutes of starting the movie. Check it out. That said, Laurent, I have to. I've got to admit, spooky scale 1. Like, it's not.
I'll give it a 1.5. But yes, I agree with you. It's not. This is not a scare. This is not a horror film. So yeah, on the spooky scale, probably 1 to 5.
Yeah,
1.5.
1.5. Okay, but the 0.5 is for the, oh no, that situation seems terrifying.
It's terrifying. The idea, the concept of it is terrifying. But yes, in terms of is it going to keep you up at night, it's not scary.
No, not at all. That doesn't mean you shouldn't check it out this Halloween season. All right, well, let's move on to our next film in the lineup, Smile 2.
I need you to listen to me. Something really bad happened. You remember Louis Fergoli from high school? I went to his apartment. But when I showed up, Louis?
No, wait for me! What?
He was smiling at me.
So according to IMDb, Smile 2 is described as about to embark on a world tour. Global pop sensation Taylor Swift, Sky Riley, begins experiencing increasingly terrifying and inexplicable events. Overwhelmed by escalating horrors and the pressure of fame, Sky is forced to face her past with a smile on her face. I did the last part in there. This film, Smile 2, was written and directed by Parker Finn, who returned from the first film. And here's we got to give the first film some credit. It was one of the big breakout theatrical hits of 2022, not just in horror, but the whole year. It grossed $217.4 million worldwide against a budget of $17 million, and no one saw that coming. It also received, honestly, more shockingly to me, is it received an 80% certified fresh rating from critics on Rotten Tomatoes and a B- cinema score. And I know B- doesn't sound super high, but horror is notoriously rated very low for cinema scores. So that's actually a pretty good horror movie rating. And this film, Smile 2, was released in theaters Friday, October 18th, so playing in a theater right now near you. I gotta say, LeBron, just real quick, because I don't think we ever talked about Smile 1 proper on this show, did we? I mean, what did you think of that film?
The trailer for it I thought looked like shit, and I remember thinking like that's going to be one of those, one of those things that just comes and goes. We never talk about it again. Just run of the mill. And I was actually surprised. I think probably because I went in with such low expectations that I actually had really a good time with it. And the concept there is definitely derivative of a lot of like maybe It Follows, The Ring.
Yeah.
It has those vibes to it, but it did kind of remix and repurpose those ideas in an interesting way to have a conversation about the way that trauma passes down to people. It found an interesting way to, to make trauma the monster,
right.
And this thing that lingers and kind of like, and that's a relatable human element that I thought they brought to it that I didn't expect to be in what I expected to be just like a B horror movie, and I thought it was more thoughtful than it had any right to be. I wouldn't say it was great, but I did think it was pretty good and better than it had any right to be.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. That trailer, gosh, I was actively mocking this film, the Smile 1, before it came out, because that trailer just felt like it was a product of like 2003.
Yes.
Like the trailer seemed so retro. They showed not even the worst parts of the movie, but it was the way everything was framed. I'm like, this looks terrible.
It looks cheesy, yeah.
And when it came out and I saw it, I was like, holy cow. Again, maybe it was because the expectations were so low, but I was like, this has some big ideas on its mind. It's using a lot of familiar plot mechanics. Like you said, it's basically It Follows, but instead of the STD being the transmission for the ghost, it's trauma. It looks really good too. It has a very strong aesthetic, very strong editing style. Again, just from a production standpoint, way better than I expected from Smile 1. And I think it's going to take us right into Smile 2. I was pleasantly surprised to see that they could do it twice.
Yeah.
Overall, I was very satisfied with Smile 2. I mean, it's not perfect. It's one of those where, did you like the first film? Okay, you're probably going to like the second film, because the second film is basically just the first film, but what if it's a pop star instead of a therapist?
Yes.
And using that slightly tweaked premise enables them to talk about an entire different sort of idea related to fame, celebrity culture, while still kind of keeping that core thesis about mental wellness at the center. So, I thought Smile 2 was a really strong follow-up. That said, I don't think I want to Smile 3 anytime soon. I feel like it was creative in the right ways, but if you would look at the pacing and the beats, it is very similar to 1. And it works a second time. I'm not saying it can't work a third time. I'm saying I need some space.
Sure.
But what do you think, LaRon?
No, I agree. I think Smile 2 was again another big swing this year, big surprise this year. A movie wasn't super even with my feelings about the last one. I was thinking, I was like, yeah, but they're gonna find a way to ruin it somehow. They're gonna, you know what I mean? They're gonna milk this out, and it's gonna turn into it's gonna make me dislike what I liked before, you know. And surprisingly, I feel like this expanded upon this idea, and like you said, it's really interesting the way they repurpose it into celebrity life, and kind of the pressures and demands of that particular culture, and how a traumatic event that happens to the lead actress in this, Naomi Scott, who, by the way, gives an amazing.
Oh my gosh, she shows up, and this is again a lot. You would think you'd phone it in. No, she shows up big time.
Big time. There's a lot of acting here. A lot of snot crying and screaming, and just it really plays into, you know, this very tortured woman. It actually does take its time, I feel like, in the first act to really characterize this woman, and I appreciated that slower pace. You know what I mean? To kind of give her the full weight of this, so that all those moments, all these horrific things that eventually happen later in the story have weight to them.
Yes.
And so there really is an honest kind of nuanced conversation about what she's already experienced traumatically, before the demonic supernatural element even comes back into play. And so, but you can see how it's going to prey on that particular incident, and and I found that really interesting. It's also just really cool to look at. I thought, like,
it looks so good.
It looks great. Even we were shitting on Trap earlier this year. Like, this is the concert movie that
This movie has 1.5 concert sequences in it.
Yes.
And it's so much better than ever. I'm sorry, Lady Raven, you're just not quite on this level.
I'm sorry, competing pop stars. But yeah, we're pitting women against each other, Caleb. But no, but it
works because it's not a concert film, but they do great concert sequences, and then without saying too much about where the film goes, they use it as a really clever vehicle for some terrifying stuff.
Yes. And
it's not like an IO, and also there's a concert.
And not just the pressures of being a celebrity, like just like the demand of having to go on stage when you're not feeling up to it. It shows that, but also just the interaction, the weird interaction, that weird connection that famous people have with their fans, and that weird kind of like invasive nature of, like, you know, people like kind of preying or prodding on you all the time. But it's interesting the way that it plays into that, as well, as that kind of becomes an element that constantly keeps haunting her. And man, and then in terms of the number of things, the number of individuals that are terrorizing her sometimes at one moment.
Dude, there's one sequence in the middle of the movie. I think we're thinking about the same one.
Where in her apartment complex.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
that scene is money.
Like that was when I was like, we're cooking.
Shit.
We're
There's
cooking.
So much happening in this moment. I am so stressed out.
Great. I love it because it takes its time. It's a whole sequence, and you know something bad's about to happen. You know there's gonna be a jump scare, and
Yes.
And it takes its time, and when it finally happens, you're like, "Holy cow, this is nuts!" I love it.
I even think it very cleverly as the way it pivots into this narrative. I actually really like the opening sequence as well.
It ties directly into the first film. That was an amazing sequence, by the way.
I was like, "Whoa, we're real," because I did wonder. I was like, "Okay, Smile 2, but it has any connection to the other one?" And then we learned Scene 1. Okay, 6 days later,
like you end Smile 1, you immediately start Smile 2. You feel like you're right in the next episode.
They gave way to send off the previous film and then go right back into a completely new narrative with similar, obviously, occurrences. But yeah, I just found this to be just bigger, bolder, more, you know, just a lot more happening. It's kind of the Scream 2 for me, where it's like it takes everything that you loved about the last one and gives you a bigger smorgasbord of like set pieces to play with. There's so many memorable moments in here where normally I'm not against jump scares the way that some people, we kind of like scrutinize those with horror movies. I think they're integral to horror films. I just don't think scary movies should rely on them. I think jump scares are necessary for these, but they need to be executed well.
Well, it's all about how they create the tension, right? And that's what I think Smile and Smile 2, I think, does even better than the first film. Is not every sequence is it's not how many jump scares can we pack into a scene. It's there's a jump scare in this scene.
What's the use of it?
There's a jump scare coming. It's okay. When, where's it going to happen? And you're never expecting it. When it finally shows up.
Especially in this one. Like at a certain point, I'd say towards the midway point, all the way till the end, there's so many jump scares in this to the point where I was like, okay, I need a moment to just breathe for a second, because it genuinely felt like they were happening so frequently. But I appreciated that relentless terror that it kind of presents there. So so I was actually a big fan of this. This was a better sequel than it had any right to be, just like the first one was a better a precursor to something that we didn't expect to be good.
I just want to say huge shout out to writer director Parker Finn. I'm really curious about. Listen, if they make a Smile 3, I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
I'm there for it. A little bit of a breather would be good, so that I can, or either that or a really fresh take. Not that they've wanted, but it's just one of those things. I'm like, oh, this is good. Don't give me too much of this in one stretch. I would really like to see what he does with Smile
with other material.
Right.
There's a lot of good camera work here. It's shot very well.
There's without spoiling it. There's a specific moment with, the incident with Sky. I can say that that they go back to a couple of different times. The camera work in those sequences was the most intense I was the entire movie.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about with the way it was in the first person POV. Whew,
yes,
so good.
Yeah, and she, like I said, she carries this very well. Shout out to a couple of different actors in here that were really good. Jack Nicholson's son is in this.
Yeah, dude.
He does his small role, but he's creepy.
He gets the creepy Jack Nicholson smile, though.
Rosemary DeWitt is her mom. Really good, effective in that role. So yeah, it was just I was just surprised at the level of care that was sent here. It is interesting to think of Parker Finn. Like you said, it'd be interesting to see him with new material, because he clearly has some skill and he has some restraint and he knows how to ratchet up tension very well. It will be interesting to see in a different universe
what that looks like.
Because he had a short film.
Yeah,
Smile
got Smile made. It's basically his proof of concept for Smile.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's almost like he keeps remaking his same thing. So it's just like each one's a different iteration of the same material. So it will be interesting to see him,
He's learned the tools.
He knows what's working here. He clearly likes this Smile verse that he's created.
And if it's written and directed by him, cool. But, sometimes you can be a great director and not have to write your material. You can find someone who's got a really brilliant script that really gels with you, and you go shoot that script.
Absolutely.
Either way. So what letter grade would you give Smile to, LaRon?
I'd give this a B+. This was a lot of fun. I can't wait to rewatch it with my husband. He liked the first one as well. And this one also is just... It's more fun. It's just all together.
Yeah, we didn't mention that. The first movie is often oppressive in a lot of ways. And this one, while there is that sense of dread attached because of, again, the way they execute the jump scares and the psychological terror, that same sequence we were talking about, that's a showstopper in the middle, is also kind of fun.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
You're like, this is silly.
This is a fun, scary movie. Yeah. And the first one was for sure more dour, I would say, and more serious. So just say that.
For sure. Well, where would you put it on the spooky scale?
I'll give this a 4. This one wins the spook of most of the movies we've been watching. So
of the group we watched, this is definitely the scary, like more in the traditional sense of the word scary. I'm also going to give it a 4, maybe even a 4.5. If jump scares bother you, I'd go 4.5. There are a lot of them, but again, to your point, I don't necessarily inherently hate jump scares. I hate them. I hate when a movie leans on them.
Yeah, when it's lazy and it's all you got. There's no substance to what you just did. It can't just be a cat runs across the screen.
Right.
Like it's okay to sit me in this oppressive space and then shock me with something, but it should mean something and it should advance the story in some way.
And also, sometimes when you set it up like you're going to deliver one and you don't, and that's when you really got people on edge again. So for me, that gets it a 4.5 out of 5 in terms of just fun rides. Well, LaRon, there are a lot of other horror movies that we didn't get to elaborate on today, but I did want to go through a few of them that we've watched recently. And I actually want to start off with this one. Now, this one came out in July. I think we might have talked about it briefly on the show earlier this year, but we never had a proper at-length conversation about it. This is not a deep dive, but Longlegs is making another resurgence as we get into spooky season because it is a somewhat horror adjacent film. We don't necessarily need to spend too long on it, but formally on the Cinematic Schematic, what is the Cinematropolis take on Longlegs?
I think Longlegs, that I've since rewatched it. It's surprisingly divisive among some of the people in our film community. So
Like shockingly divisive.
I just wouldn't have thought so. This definitely was touted as the scariest movie of the year. I would argue against that. I actually thought Smile 2 was scarier to be real in terms of spook, but I do think this is probably a B movie with A level craft.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. That to me gives it, maybe a 3.5, and I do think that it's measured very well. I think it's paced very well. I think the acting is very solid, particularly from Micah Monroe. And this is a courtroom procedural crime thriller. You know what I mean? That has, yes, this oppressive kind of undertone of dread and misery and death. And I feel like that it works fine as what it is. I don't think it reinvents the wheel in any way, but I did think that it was so solidly shot and paced and directed that it does feel it's worth a watch. It's worth a watch. I think
people should watch it to decide for themselves. I have also been similarly shocked and kind of like just what's the word? Puzzled maybe by how much certain people have really disliked the movie,
taking offense to particularly the third act.
The third act, I think the third act's pretty weak.
Yeah,
well, the payoff at the end for me is one of those where there's a couple of different
ideas it's
playing with,
and then it goes with the
easiest one, and I was like, oh well, okay. I mean, that's
all this build up. All this build up should have amounted to more than taking the easiest route.
Yes.
And there was a couple of different ways you could have gone, and it's like you ran out of steam at the end and decided to just.
You get backed into a corner. It's like when you get backed into a corner as a writer, and you're like, well, what if I just did that?
Yeah.
You're like, I thought about this for 3 days. Can't figure it out. I'm just going to do this because it makes sense. And it does technically make sense. Is it the least interesting version of the things they could have done? Yes.
Yes.
Does that in any way, in my opinion, take away from the atmosphere of dread, Micah Monroe,
the score?
Like, it does so much right that I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a bad movie. I think that's unfair.
Overrated?
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Well, if someone's coming at you and says it's the scariest movie of the year, yeah.
Perhaps,
I absolutely think it's overrated, but I think
it's solid.
It's a B movie with A movie production values. I think it's a great way to put it. And I do think people who are interested in horror should check it out. I played Alan Wake 2, one of my favorite games of last year, and there's quite a lot of overlap in terms of how that game also similarly executes the atmosphere and the tone that is sometimes silly but usually scary. The other thing that's been a little more polarizing is the Nicolas Cage performance. And I don't know, some people were just sitting here saying it's bad. I thought it was I think Nicolas Cage was really well used until he gets a big Hannibal Lecter type scene at the end. And even that scene did not ruin it for me, but it
was low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, this isn't surprising.
Nick Cage went Nick Cage.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen him do it in so many different movies. So yeah, this is a solid film. Again, I wouldn't overpraise it, but I do think there's a lot that's well done.
Yeah, throwing out letter grade, I'd say like C+ probably for me personally.
I would probably give it a B-. Yeah.
B-. Okay, I think that's fair. I think that's good. Good. So there are our opinions on Long Legs, formalized on the Cinematic Schematic. Laron, I didn't have the guts. Literally, the guts ripped out of me before I could make it to the theater to watch Terrifier 3. I've not seen either of the first two films. I was toying really heavily with the idea of maybe just jumping right into the third one, but unfortunately was not able to find the time to make it to the theater. You, however, suffered one. I mean,
yes.
You did not suffer. You boldly stepped in and embraced the challenge of Terrifier 3. What did you think of the film?
I am so fascinated by the phenomenon around this particular franchise.
I should note, as of this last weekend, has, by all accounts, outgrossed Joker 2.
Which is insane. And it's so weird because then Smile won this particular weekend. It's just like something with the smiles and clowns or something are winning the weekend every week. I guess we're in a cynical kind of place.
You called that phenomenon, and I just wanted to add credibility to that, to the $200 million Joker movie.
Dethroned Joker 2 its first weekend.
Yeah, Terrifier 3 that cost like $5 million, dethroned the $200 million clown movie. But anyway, it is a phenomenon.
It is a phenomenon. It's very interesting. I'm fascinated by the phenomenon more than I am the movies, but just because it started with such humble. I mean, if you watch that first Terrifier movie, I think it's on Tubi, it is so lo-fi B horror. Like there's really, with exception of some really well executed death scenes towards the latter half of it, which you can tell all their money went to because they're done practically. You're like, oh, well, I appreciate this not looking cheap. You know, like everything else looks cheap and the acting's terrible, but the deaths were pretty cool looking, you know, like, so it's like a very like passable, just
some dude gets sawed in half. That's the only thing I've heard about the first movie.
Yeah. And it's pretty gross. And it's like, okay. And surprisingly realistic looking. So I was like, okay. So when they beefed it up and made Terrifier 2, I was like expecting about the same. And I was actually surprised that the scope of 2 to 1 is like, whoa. I mean, it's featuring the same character, but you can tell there's a budget. Or at least it feels like there's a budget.
What is the clown's name?
Art
the clown.
Yes. And it's so like, and he's a mime and he doesn't speak. And so he's kind of an amalgamation of Freddy. He has Freddy's sensibility, like that sense of humor, that maniacal kind of like enjoying his job of torturing people very well. But he doesn't speak. So there's that level of Michael Myers too, where there's just you don't know his motive or what he's doing. And there's obviously some supernatural elements for people who've seen it. You'll understand what I mean. But 2 just was such a beef, like a horror orgasm in many ways. You know what I mean? Just like in terms of just like how extreme the violence is. It was like, man, he said, as soon as you give me a paycheck, I'm gonna kill some people. You know what I mean? Like with this one. And so it really does feel like these are shock value horror movies that have a very fun kind of 80s retro vibe to it, a really grainy texture to them. And Terrifier 3 repurposes everything in, you know, a Christmas setting, which I thought was a lot of fun. They do a lot of disgusting things with, you know, defiling the the Christmas spirit. So I felt like this is a good continuation of what he's building on here. He says he has one more movie in him, and that he has no more ideas outside of that. He's like, I really needed to die after 4 because I have a very distinct place to end this. And I think that's a good idea because I really think you can go out with a swing here. So for the people that like your, you know, blood splatter gore, there is camp in here. It's fun enough, you know. I
don't know much about 3, but I noticed set at Christmas time. They do a lot with the Christmas theme.
A lot of Christmas things. If you want to think about decorating a tree with not garland, stuff like that.
All right.
Very like, it's there. It knows what it's doing. You know what I mean? And I think, and it knows what the people coming to see these movies want. So I feel like if you know what you're getting into, these movies can be a lot of fun, without necessarily being particularly deep or meaningful or interesting in that way.
So if you were going to give Terrifier 3 a letter grade,
I'll give it a B- because it does what it says on the box.
Yeah.
You know, I had a little bit more fun with 3 than I did 2.
Okay.
But I've heard in other circles that is the other way around for them, but that's fine. So I think I like the Christmas angle. It's just a lot more fun.
All right. Well, there it is. Terrifier 3. Maybe for the 4th one, I'll finally whip up the courage and carve out the time. You know, because I don't know. It's weird. I'm a Saw fan. Like in the womb, I have seen all of those movies, most of them more than twice. But so I'm not afraid of gore, but there's just something about like the idea of, the gore for gore's sake.
Yeah.
I don't generally seek those out. And the thing about Saw is I don't actually go to it for gore. It's more about the intricate soap opera like mythology that it has going on. And there is the killer does have this underlying philosophy that, while is obviously full of hypocrisy and contradictions, all of that dumb mythology stuff really works for me. Whereas so for Terrifier 3, it sounds like they're building up to that.
There's a lot of world building, and I think this is the one aspect I do think you would like, because there's a lot of, I won't say Zelda, but I know that I said that. That's the trigger word for him. I just to get him in the.
As I drink out of this cup with the Zelda logo on it.
Exactly. There's a lot of the supernatural elements are very fantastical in the sense that they're teasing this bigger, like underworld, you know, space that we've yet to see yet. But I feel like 4 is really like it's hinting that we're going somewhere into the descent to hell sort of situation. I found that really interesting. The lead character, the really strong final girl, really have enjoyed her. Lauren Lavera, she has such a presence. She reminds me of a young Angelina Jolie in her Gia era.
Oh yeah.
Just has such a strong presence where, like, even if the acting around her isn't very good, she's always compelling to watch. And she's the, what do you call it, the Laurie Strode of this particular thing, where she's been, you know, they've been really building the duality between these two characters really well. So I'm just hoping they really go to the spaces that they've kind of only teased at in the last two movies. So
sounds like it's going to lead to that Spawn crossover that I've been dying for. All right, so there is Laurent's review of Terrifier 3. Next up is a little movie called Never Let Go. This is a film directed by Alexandra Aja, who more famously had directed Crawl a few years ago. And before Crawl, I mean, he's actually done a bunch of movies. Crawl's the one I think got kind of made him a name. He also did Piranha 3D back in the day, or The Hills Have Eyes, if we want to go way back, and even High Tension too. Man, he's done a lot of good movies, interesting movies. You might not like them, you know. And this one stars Halle Berry as Mama. That is literally her credited name. She's raising two sons. I think it's Nolan and Samuel, I believe.
I think they're twins in this.
They are twins, yeah. I'm trying not to get too far into the premise, but essentially, they believe that they must stay connected to their house because it has not been infected with evil. It's sort of like a little shrine from this evil that has taken over the world outside of the house.
Yeah.
And Halle Berry is sort of the mother figure who's watching after her boys, training them on the ways to stay. So they have to they can't move away from the house very far. They have to stay attached by a rope. And their whole thing is, I'm never going to let go, is the thing that the two brothers say to each other frequently. Laurent Chapman, what did you think of Never Let Go?
So it's interesting, like I mentioned that Smile 2 was kind of correlated to Trap in the sense that there was this concert element to it, whereas this movie seems like it's a better version of the Watchers, I think it was called.
Earlier this year. Yeah.
The Shyamalan's daughter, another Shyamalan movie.
Different Shyamalan.
Different Shyamalan, but Shyamalan universe space. This is a better version of that particular story, or at least the ideas that were in that particular story. This idea of like what's real, what's not real, what's kind of, you know, like there's this it plays that game of, is mom crazy or is what she's saying true? Is this evil real or is it imagined? And it plays a very delicate balance with that particular thing. And this is actually a very surprisingly restrained film, I would say, for Alexandra Aja, because his movies are typically just pretty gross and just get right to the nitty gritty.
Also larger than life in a lot of ways.
So this is weird how cerebral this movie actually kind of is, and how much restraint that the actors are actually given to kind of play in this space. This movie worked for me a lot for the first 2/3.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I was there for the ride. The performances were working for me. Halle Berry is always great to see. I love her in genre movies.
A lot of good use of quiet in this movie.
Yes, absolutely.
Just and also the mystery. It's the mystery box sort of thing where the mystery is a lot more compelling than the answers they end up providing.
Exactly.
The answers they end up providing don't ruin the movie by any means, but it's just like, I don't know what to make of this.
It deflates it to a certain degree,
right?
For sure, because the not knowing is more interesting than the knowing here. And then when you know, you're like, okay, cool. You know what I mean? Like, it was more interesting when I didn't. And I think that was the same issue, I think, with Longlegs.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that the mystery and the intrigue is so much more interesting than the reveal that ultimately happens in both of these movies. And so I think that this one was, I think, pretty heavily underseen.
I mean, it's not a masterpiece by any means, but it really flew under the radar.
It flew under the radar.
Had hardly any marketing, and you and I are the only people I know who saw this movie.
Who went to go see it, yeah. So I don't think it's a bad film. I think it has a lot of atmosphere. I thought the young actors were very good. Halle Berry's very good. And again, I liked the mental tug of war, you know, that went on for 2/3 of the runtime. And then I felt the ending kind of teetered out on a little bit of a whimper, but again, didn't kill it for me. But this was a solid film, but unremarkable though. Yeah,
it is what I would say is a perfect streamer. You know, you know, I've been dropping the ball on this. We'll circle back to the ones we skipped. Spooky rating. How scary would you say it is? 1 to 5.
So there are 2 sequences in this that I found particularly frightening. But I would say for the most part, this is something that I'm equipped to handle. But so I would say I'll give this 2.5 on the spooky meter.
I go a little further. I'd say 3.
Okay.
Mostly because there are sequences that I'm still thinking about.
Sure.
So it's like right down the middle. 3, I guess 2.5, but yeah, 2.5, 3.
Yeah.
3 stars. It's spooky. The atmosphere is really effective. And because of the way they execute the atmosphere, the sequences that get pretty intense are pretty powerful, I think. I'd say C+ for the letter grade.
Same, C+.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next one I have noted here, which is Salem's Lot. Now, I had to include this one, okay, because we have been talking for years at this point. When is Salem's Lot gonna come out? Is it ever gonna come out? It's been done for a while, and the fact that they kept not announcing a release date for it made me get less and less excited for the Salem's Lot remake. And it turns out that it's because it's a perfectly fine streamer movie. So Salem's Lot, for those of you who aren't familiar, is based on a Stephen King novel where vampires essentially come in and take over quietly, start to take over a small town in Maine. What you know it, right outside of Castle Rock, in fact. And this is a couple of interesting things I'll say about this. This is a period piece that I believe is set, end of the 70s, early 80s. I do believe. So, it does make some interesting choices in terms of adaptation. 75. So it's set when the novel was set originally. And, I had fun with, so context. I watched this on a plane on my phone. I downloaded it before on my phone because I knew I was going to be on a plane. And my thought was, I was once excited about this, so I owe it to myself to watch this movie, but also the fact that it kind of came and went, and I'm not even looking at reviews, the fact that it came and went and no one talked about it being out was like, must have been a big nothing burger. But I owe it to myself to watch it from curiosity. It has a lot of actors in it I really like, and I thought the trailer even looked kind of solid, and turns out it was a perfectly fine airplane movie. I'm glad I did not spend 2 hours of my time at home when I could have been watching something else, watching it, but I am glad to have watched it. Frankly, it feels like half a movie that they are like, they get halfway through and they're like, oh crap, we got to wrap this up real fast. It's kind of bizarre how the first hour feels very methodically paced. You're sort of getting to know all these characters. I actually found a lot of the setup to be the character world building to be kind of intriguing. And I think if this was like a 3-part miniseries, maybe even 4 parts potentially, could have been great. Yeah. Instead, we get like a under 2-hour movie, and I mean it's like the last act feels like they cram at least half the book into the plot. Now, does it have a fun ending sequence at a drive-in movie theater? Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. But the movie's pretty unremarkable at the end of the day. And I can see exactly why the Warner Brothers execs decided to just put it straight on Max.
Yeah.
Laurent, have you had a chance to catch up with this yet?
I haven't, because the review that you gave me before was that it was an airplane movie, and I was not on said airplane. So I will wait for that moment, and I'll watch it there.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, that's a good choice. C-?
Sure.
C-. Like, I don't regret my time here. It was not offensively bad. I would still love to see someone else come along and make Salem's Lot into a full-blown 2-part movie or 4-part miniseries. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Well, Laurent, so on the spooky meter, I'm going to go with a 2. And I'm saying 2 because, man, the other thing that's frustrating is they get some of the vampire shit really right. There's some really creepy sequences of kids, like kid vampires hanging outside windows being all creepy, and I'm like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the rest of the movie doesn't live up to the creepy kids outside the windows. So 2 on the spooky scale, C-. Not the best. Well, Laurent, were there any other movies that you wanted to talk about today?
I think we covered most of our bases. I hope we've given listeners plenty of things to consider for the duration of what's left of October for spooky season, and if not, you can, if you're like me, spooky season's all year long.
It's all year long. I mean, so even if you miss it for Halloween, which is tomorrow, if you're listening, you still can know which horror movies from the second half of 2024 you need to put on your list to watch for later. And Laurent, because we skipped them, must ask, Long Legs spooky rating.
Ooh, Long Legs spooky rating. For most of its runtime until the actual reveal, it is pretty creepy. So I would give that a 3.5, 3.5.
I go 4, man. I go 4. Okay. I was all in on the vibes.
Yeah.
And Terrifier 3.
Terrifier 3. This is kind of like The Substance, where I'm like, if I'm rating it on just like how grotesque and disgusting it gets, then 5. But scary wise, Terrifier 3 is probably a 2. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Terrifier, visceral, not scary. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there are a few movies you can check out this spooky season in terms of 2024 horror movies. LaRon, thanks so much for joining as always. Where can people follow you and your work online, fellow member of the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle?
Thank you. Yeah, they can continue to follow my work on the Cinematropolis for more podcast reviews and my film review column, Real Insights with LaRon Chapman.
Excellent. Check those out there. Of course, you can find all my work over at thecinematropolis.com. Or if you do want to keep up with me on social media, whether it's Letterboxd, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, look up C Masters Talk. That is letter C Masters Talk. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you again next time. Knock on all the wood. If the world operates how we hope, we should be returning soon with a review of Sean Baker's new film, Anora. However, this is a classic prestige season move. They announce the release date, but they don't tell you which theaters it's going to come out into. And then on that announced release date, they only put it out in 6 theaters. So we're unclear when Oklahoma City or at least the press here are going to get to see said movie. If all goes well, we will be reviewing Anora. If it does not go well, you'll still hear us talk about Anora at some point, but we'll be talking about The Heretic next instead. Either way, I'm excited for both of our options. No matter how you listen, stay tuned. We'll catch you again next time.